when the land acknowledgements come for your deed. In Richmond, British Columbia, homeowners recently received letters warning that their property ownership may now be in doubt following a BC Supreme Court decision. Cowichan Tribes versus Canada. Nailed the verses there.
Nice.
Which granted Aboriginal title to portions of the city, including areas near Vancouver International Airport. The ruling introduced a concept called dual title, meaning land can be both privately owned and somehow recognized as belonging to an Indigenous group. Richmond officials say they were not notified prior to the judgment and are urgently assessing the implications for taxes, mortgages, and ownership rights, with a public meeting set for October 28th. Though the ruling may still be appealed, it reflects the logical end of Canada's equity agenda, transforming symbolic land acknowledgements into policy. The decision, if upheld, could redefine private property rights across Canada, signaling a shift toward a post-liberal order where ownership itself becomes conditional. So are we witnessing the first step towards redefining private property as a politically contingent right?
Yeah, this is interesting in a very terrible way, right? So if this gets appealed and gets knocked down, then you have to go, okay, are they going to reload their gun and try to rehash this in some other capacity in some other location in Canada? And if they do, then you kind of go, okay, the federal government's making a move here. And you got to try to wonder why or what's happening. So, I mean, you and I have had this conversation before. The funny thing about saying it's Cowichan property is who owned it before them? Mm-hmm. And you've seen now other tribes come out and be like, no, it was ours. No, it was ours first. Right. Like, it's not like they were peaceful, broke up the land and let it, it never changed hands, right? They were violent, did what they did with land as well.
And so, also, it's important to note, too, the Aboriginals never even had the concept of ownership or private property before. So saying they owned it is like, by what metric?
Right. It's ridiculous. So one side of this argument, I kind of go, okay, if this is the federal government that is sort of hatching a plan to try to break down property rights in Canada, the conspiracy theorists get to run wild here, right? Because it's like, you'll own nothing, be happy. Like that whole, that World Economic Forum slogan comes to life very quickly. So what would that look like? Well, if you go to places like Haiti, you don't actually own the land in Haiti. You lease it off the government. Costs you X number of dollars. You buy it for a 100-year lease or something like that. So this happens in other countries. Are we going down the same path? When you look at how this could shake out, you look at Carney's move towards capital expenses versus operating expenses. You look at, how that actually affects the budget. Now, he's using it as a budget tool, but it does mean that the government, through capital assets, will own more of Canada. They'll own more property. They'll own more of whatever the capital expenses are going towards. That's how it works. So you kind of go, okay, and they're also maybe taking away property rights. What does that look like? Who's going to enforce that? Well, the Aboriginal tribes here aren't going to be enforcing it. It'll be in tandem with the federal government. So does this come in the way of like a new tax? Is there now like an Aboriginal land tax? And now instead of, in addition rather to property tax, you pay an extra 5% a year to this other group, which will then be enforced by the federal government? I don't know. Or do they just continue to expand this? And obviously I'm just spitballing ideas. Do they continue to expand this program across Canada? Because there's a lot of land that, what's it called?
Unceded.
There's a lot of unceded land, like large majority in the 90 percentile, right?
BC is 95% unceded.
Right. So it could go through the same process. So we may end up in this situation where it's kind of like, hey, you lease the land off the government, then the government acts as a proxy for the Aboriginals. They give them a kickback on some of this and whatever. And that's maybe the access point they use. I don't know. Like, that's a bit of a leap. Don't get me wrong. But what's happening here is preposterous, right? You now own property that you don't own, which is already bad enough because you paid property taxes, which I have a problem with. But now you have sort of Indigenous ownership of it. So this is an entirely huge mess. But I guess the other side of it is this. Are they hatching a plan to try to make it so you can't have private property? That's A. Or B, did virtue signaling just go too far? You know what I mean? Like, did they... Like when they do this liberal ideology stuff and how it permeates institutions, it goes all the way through the judicial system. We know this, and it's significantly favored to the liberals. So when you look at that, was this a plan, and is this something they're trying to implement that will be nonpartisan and they'll just keep their foot on the gas? Or was this one of those things that happened as a result of just ridiculous liberal ideology, and this is kind of where we landed? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah. So I don't think it's liberal ideology. I think it's Marxist ideology. In fact, it's anti-liberal.
Well, today's liberal.
But I think we need to stop giving them that title, because liberal, in my mind, is actually a pretty good thing. If you're a liberal, it means that you think the primary purpose of politics is to ensure that individuals are free from political and economic coercion. It's like, that's not a bad ideology, to make sure that people aren't being coerced by their state or by the corporations around them. Not bad. Actually, by a lot of metrics, I fit the term liberal. But a Marxist is definitely more true to where they are. They see the entire worldview through the lens of oppressor versus oppressed. And this is the thing, is that, this is why I think it's so important to properly label them, is because I think we should sit around as a society and, even if you are I'm not saying everybody should be a liberal, but conservatives and liberals should be able to, hash out and find some compromise between the two. You will never find compromise with Marxists. Like, I don't think that they should, just like how you would view, again, just like Nazis, I'm not even saying legislation, but we have such a cultural immune response to things like Nazism that a person would never even get to a position of power with those ideas in order to implement policy. So I'm not saying that we need to, put speech laws in place to be able to put these people out of power. It's just that we need to have a cultural immune response to these Marxist ideas. And if we label them liberal, then we're never going to actually get that immune response. But this is where, again, I view ideologies very different than I think most people, in the sense where it doesn't need to be a plan. It's like the idea can evolve as it goes. So this idea starts as when somebody initially takes it in. It's, okay, well, there's oppressed and oppressor people in the world, and that's the exact split. And you're either in one camp or in the other. If you accept that worldview, you don't need to, when you first take that on, accept everything else that's come with this 10 years down the line. It's that idea starts to grow and starts to manifest out from that, and then you eventually get to these places. However, I do think there is definitely organizations and groups, whether it be things like the Fabian Society, which I know is a UK-based group, but there is definitely these small groups that have been working towards this kind of stuff explicitly for like 100 years.
Right.
So there's definitely a plan, and some people are definitely just going along with the flow. Some people just like the fact that they feel like they can be a highly moral person by saying, I care so much about the indigenous. But I think what's really important to note here too is that it's just like that one topic we were talking about an episode or two ago, where we were saying, all of you liberals feel, or really Marxists in hiding, you feel like you are going to be benefited by this system, that it's on your side. But as soon as they get boots on the ground, essentially, and turn it into a totalitarian state, you're going to be put up against the same wall as the rest of us.
Yes.
And I view this very similarly to the indigenous stuff, where it's just like, look, the indigenous people of Canada might feel like, oh, our lives are going to get better from this. But it's like, no. You think that they're going to take your property and then give it to the indigenous, and then you guys will have more say and more control. Nope, they're just going to use you as a justification to take the property and then keep it. And then that's where you're at now. And dude, I actually really despise a lot of the people that push for these kinds of policies. You even see it. Like, I did a video on this last night, and you can see comments of people saying, well, now you know how it feels and all this. And I saw one person arguing with another person about, well, your issue isn't really with us, the people that say moved here 10 years ago and now own property. Your issue is with a government 200 years ago. And I want to say, like, no, they don't have an issue with the government 200 years ago either. They do just genuinely want your shit, and the historical narrative is just a justification for them essentially saying, give me your stuff for free.
100%.
It's like these people don't have actually any valid or deep understanding of the history of how these things played out. Now, there is definitely obviously wrongs that the settlers and the Europeans had whenever they landed here. But like this idea that it was just, this peace-loving indigenous group, and then all of a sudden the mean genocidal Europeans landed on the shores and took all of their stuff is just like, okay, that's just a blatant, that's the equivalent of when there's a breakup happening and just being like, it's all their fault. And it's like, no, things are more complicated than
that. I mean, the way I see things, for better or worse, is we kind of live in a world where whoever's got the biggest stick takes the stuff. That's kind of how it's operated. That's, and Canada came in here. I guess it was really Britain, the UK. Sure. Want to call it colonization? Okay, fine. Like, that's what happened. There was a war. There was a fight. Whoever won took the land. That's how the whole world has actually been parsed out. That's kind of how it happens. And like, I'm not trying to like justify all the actions, but that's what happened. And that's how we've continued to operate. That's how the world, and I guess the thing is, people are viewing it through today's lens. Like, oh, we're more just, we're more decent, we're more civilized. Okay, but that's not how it worked back then. And that's how
it's actually not even how it works now.
Well, no, I mean, you look at the wars that are currently happening, and they're continuing to annex locations and places, and they're fighting over their border wars all the time. Afghan and Pakistan, they were just giving her shit the other day. Like, they decided to calm down because it was getting pretty out of hand pretty quickly. Like, people fight over land all the time. Sorry, like, it's not pretty. Not everything in this world, like, life isn't fair, and people can look at me like, oh, okay, great, well, your life's not so bad. I'm like, it's not what I'm saying. I'm taking this is historical context from hundreds of years ago. That's how the world operated, and that's how the world got to where we are today. So you can't use today's lens to change things from back then. It's just it's like tearing down statues to me. I'm like, well, that's how the world operated at that time. There was like, you can call it the Overton window, or you can just call it acceptable. What was acceptable within society? Sure, it wasn't great in a lot of ways. Understood. Got it. Cool. But that's how society operated, and that's what was acceptable, and that's how we got here today. You can't use rules from today to look through to the past and then make these changes. That is not an effective way to operate. So for me, this whole thing is preposterous. It makes no sense whatsoever unless there's an ulterior motive.
Right.
That's how I see it.
And that's what it is it's resentful, bitter people on the lower ends that, on essentially at the base of society that just want to, again, like to quote Michael Caine from Batman, where he says, some people just want to see the world burn.
Yes.
It's like it's the same thing with the tax the rich stuff. I don't believe that a lot of these people genuinely think their life is going to get better because the government takes more from a billionaire. It's that
that's fundamentally ridiculous.
They just want to see the billionaire lose his shit. That's it.
Yeah, which is dumb because they own all the assets. They'll just increase the prices and you'll just pay more anyway, and they'll still make their money.
Right.
They're diversified around the world, or they'll just leave the country because they have multiple passports. You're not thinking straight when you say those things.
And then, even you go to say the historical narrative around the colonization. Look, again, I'm not trying to deny that that settlers had done some terrible things. You can go read a book called Empire of the Summer Moon, which I think is a fantastic book. It's in regards to American colonies, but it's very similar how it played out across all North America. And it just shows like how these warring parties between the Aboriginals and the settlers played out. And it is violent and gruesome, but it was war. Both parties were just going to town on each other.
Yes.
However, you sit here and go, you can say, okay, well, yep, the colonizers never should have been here in the first place, so therefore they're the evil ones. First of all that stuff was happening amongst different tribes. But then on top of that as well, before that time period, if one nation ever conquered another, they weren't signing treaties and going in and going, okay, well, some of the treaties, like, it's funny when people say, well, the Europeans went back on their treaties. It's like, okay, well, some of those were the fact that they promised the indigenous groups access to education. And then now, so in one head, you're saying, well, they rescinded on their treaty because they didn't give them proper access to education. But then you look at where they gave them the education with the residential schools and day schools, and then you guys use that as an oppressive narrative as well. So it's like, no matter what, they damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation there. But then also, like, yeah, you go look at whether it was the Persians conquering the Greeks, whether it was the Arabs conquering Europe, or whether in a lot of these places, they were going in and it was just like slaughter every woman, child, and man. Like there's no like, oh, we're here now. Let's coexist and peacefully coexist and find a way to work together and make sure that this doesn't go to just complete genocide. It's like, no, genocide was the rule throughout history. And so, and two, even when they toss things at like, okay, you're like me, for example, I'm actually a pretty solid example in this sense where they'll say, well, you come from a European colonizer heritage and you're an oppressor because of it. It's like, wait, my family came from, at least my mom's side, came from Ireland, which was colonized by the UK and under imperial rule by the UK. So my ancestors were quote unquote oppressed by the same people that your ancestors were oppressed by. How are you labeling me an oppressor? Doesn't make any sense. But again, it's not about what's historically accurate or not. It's just, I need a narrative that makes me seem no moral for trying to take all your shit.
Which is where we are today. Let's see how it plays out.